Yet Sauron was ever guileful, and it is said that among those whom he ensnared with the 9 rings, 3 were great lords of Númenórean race. And when the Ulairi arose, that were the ring-wraiths, his servants, and the strength of his terror and mastery over men had grown exceedingly great, he began to assail the strong places of the Númenóreans upon the shores of the sea. Hey everyone, Yoiston here, and I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Middle-earth. Today we are going to look closer at the origins of the Nazgûl, and take some guesses as to where they all came from. Sources for today's episode are linked in the description and cards, so please check those out. My friends, thank you all so much for joining me today. Let's begin our tale. In the timeline of the Second Age, as it is written in the appendices of The Lord of the Rings, Nazgûl first appeared in 2251 of the Second Age, over 500 years after the end of the War of the Elves and Sauron. Remember that date, as it will be important throughout this whole video. Now in this video, we must indeed make a few assumptions to hone in on some answers. We must assume that, by that year, all 9 Nazgûl had been corrupted by their rings, not that some appeared then and others appeared later. We must also assume that the Nazgûl that were originally enthralled by Sauron prior to this year stayed as the same Nazgûl through the events of The Lord of the Rings, and their ensnarement never changed hands. Because we are going to take some evidence from the Nazgûl from their last years in existence in this video as well, being the late Third Age. First, as always, let's just start with what we know. In the Silmarillion it says that 3 of the Nazgûl were great lords of the Númenórean race. Now, that actually helps us greatly with locating our first 3 of the 9. Since we are again talking about 2251 of the Second Age, we know that Númenor was still an island, and that the kingdom was actually building colonies and dominions at that time. Sauron, however, would not be captured for over another 1,000 years, yet 3 of his Nazgûl would all the same be of Númenórean race. Therefore, I think it probable that sometime between circa 1800, when the Númenóreans began making more and more colonies, and 2251 of the Second Age, Sauron went to some of these colonies, or at least one of them, either in the known part of Middle-earth or to somewhere in the east or south, finding great and strong men to bear these rings, and he deceived them into taking these 3 rings. One of these men would most likely, almost certainly, become the Witch King of Angmar, mightiest of the 9 Nazgûl. And that's that, in my opinion. Likely since Númenor was already in an age of expansionism and those men began seeking more and more power, it was probably pretty easy for a shapeshifted or disguised Sauron to get them to take their rings. Now, to be honest, other than one, the last 6 will be far more difficult to guess, and we will face more uncertainty with them, because we can scarcely guess their backgrounds, cultures, or races among men that they hailed from, other than that they were not from Númenor. But again, let's take a look at what we do have. The realms of men that were in existence between the end of the War of the Elves and Sauron, 1701, and 2251, and we'll go from there. We know that there were men whose ancestors were connected to the houses of the Edain, such as the middlemen of Rhovanion, those who lived near the Vales of Anduin, Greenwood Forest, and so forth. There were also others that the Númenóreans rejected common ancestry with, the men of Shadow, likely the men of Dunland and Inner Eriador, Kelenarthon, men of the White Mountains who would become the Oathbreakers, and so on. And of course there were men in Rhûn and beyond, and down in the south towards Harad. Of these 6 Nazgûl, we know that one was called Khamûl, who was second to the Witch King himself, and was the lieutenant of Dol Guldur, and was known as the Shadow of the East. Therefore we can almost guarantee that he was some sort of Easterling mage, king, or warrior. Which leaves us with 5 Nazgûl. I would imagine that Sauron probably went to multiple places and to multiple people, as to deepen his influence, but possibly not to every culture of men in his plans. Now let me venture some guesses, as we will never have a true answer to where the Nazgûl exactly came from, but knowing what we do about the cultures of men at the time, we can definitely have some ideas. Beyond the Númenórean 3 and Khamûl, I would say that one of the 5 could have been a warrior from among the strong men of Rhovanion, tricked into joining Sauron, as that culture would have likely most rejected him besides the Númenóreans. Another would be from the Dunlandings, or related folk, as they were seemingly related to the Easterlings of the First Age, who had betrayed the elves and joined with Melkor, and they were not really fans of the Númenóreans, as there were some men in Menhiriath who aided Sauron and spied upon the Númenóreans who colonized their lands. Another Nazgûl would likely be from the southern tribes of men, those not related to the Númenóreans, but likely those that would work alongside Black Númenóreans in the future, probably from Harad. And likely the last two would be from places in the east or southeast, since Sauron had a great amount of influence there, as it says in the timeline of Middle-earth, that as the Númenóreans expanded their reach into Middle-earth, Sauron expanded his own power in the east in circa 1800. So let me summarize all of this. Again, we will likely never know where exactly the Nazgûl came from, as perhaps not even Tolkien himself knew, but if I were to guess, 3 of the 9 were Númenórean adventurers and warriors, whom Sauron enthralled in their colonies and such in Middle-earth, and the Witch King was one of those 3. Khamûl was likely a great king or leader or mage of the east, and since Sauron's power extended there, at least another 2 would be from the east, 3 counting Khamûl. 1 would possibly be from the men of Rhovanion, perhaps a king or another great warrior. Another 1 or 2 would be from the Dunlending tribes that would be akin to the Easterlings from the First Age, or perhaps another would be from Harad or other southern lands if there were not 2 from the men near or in Dunland or Calanarthon. And there we have it. It is certainly possible that the other men were all from the east, of course. But I think Sauron, probably in his arrogance and as a personal insult against the tribes of men, would have likely tried to go to multiple cultures and peoples and enthrall some of, if not their greatest warriors and leaders, just as he gave all 7 dwarven rings to the different dwarven clans. In some ways, it would perhaps inadvertently aid the Númenórean settlers, if those who could have been strongest in resisting their colonization were taken under the thraldom of Sauron, and were not there to defend their people. But again, with the answer to this question here today, we cannot be entirely sure, so let me know what you all think in the comments below. Within this approximate 5-century time frame, Sauron would find the greatest servants he would command during the rest of his time as a tyrant in Middle-earth. And so we come to the end of our tale on where did the Nazgûl likely come from. From this tale we see that it is not enough to simply be skilled or talented, but we must hone our knowledge and wisdom so that others might not manipulate those skills and talents for evil purposes. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this episode today. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and share this with a friend. What are your thoughts on this topic? Let me know in the comments below. It is interesting to always remember that behind every Nazgûl was a story of deception, torment, and the breaking of will. And I would certainly be excited to learn more about these stories. If you'd like to support the channel, please consider getting some candles from our friends Mythologie Candles, or order some Weta or United Cutlery, Lord of the Rings swords, statues, and other replicas from Castle Kon, who does international shipping, and use the code WEST at checkout. Please check out our merch and Patreon as well. Thanks to our Valar tier patrons and YouTube members, Peter Shepard, Blair Scouten, Merton, John Hume, Elizabeth Calvert, Maz Gibbs, Reese Jenkins, Arthur Merlin, Dale Davis, Kingswald Project, Robert Bogue, Theodore, and Moon Viper. Thank you so much to all of our patrons and YouTube members. Please subscribe and hit that bell button to join the Men of the West and all of the free peoples today. And I'll see you all again next week with a video on what I think would happen in Middle-earth after the events of the Lord of the Rings. My friends, thank you all so much for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one.